Welcome to Calm Mysteries, a quiet place where forgotten history, lost kingdoms, and unsolved secrets drift softly through time. There is nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to remember. Just listen, relax, and let the past carry you gently into sleep. The hour before history changed forever. You stand in the shadowed corner of a cramped printing shop in Mainz, Germany, watching Johannes Gutenberg pace back and forth across worn floorboards that creak with every step. The year is 1455, and the morning light filtering through the single window catches particles of dust and paper fibers suspended in the air like tiny constellations. You've been here since before dawn, observing the final preparations for something that will reshape human civilization, though the man before you doesn't yet grasp the full magnitude of what he's about to unleash upon the world. The printing press dominates the room, a contraption of wood and metal that looks more like an instrument of torture than a gateway to enlightenment. Gutenberg runs his ink-stained fingers along its frame, checking every screw, every plate, every carefully positioned piece of movable type. He spent the last 5 years perfecting this machine, borrowing money he cannot repay, sacrificing friendships and partnerships, betting everything on a technology that most people in this medieval city consider either witchcraft or foolishness. In precisely 1 hour, he will demonstrate his invention to a carefully selected group of merchants and clergymen who hold his financial fate in their hands. The air smells of linseed oil, metal, and the sharp tang of ink mixed fresh this morning. 3 assistants work quietly in the background, arranging sheets of paper, checking the consistency of the ink, making certain that everything will function flawlessly when the moment arrives. They move with the nervous energy of people who understand that their livelihoods depend on the success of the next 60 minutes. One of them, a young apprentice named Hans, drops a composing stick, and the metallic clatter makes everyone freeze. Gutenberg doesn't turn around, but his shoulders tense, and you can see him counting to 10 in his head before continuing his inspection. What strikes you most about this moment is how ordinary it feels. There are no angels singing, no dramatic lightning strikes, no sense of cosmic significance that you might expect from a scene that will be painted and reimagined by artists for the next 6 centuries. Instead, there's just a middle-aged man with thinning hair and permanent worry lines creased into his forehead, trying to solve a series of mundane technical problems before an audience arrives. The revolutionary nature of what's happening exists only in potential, invisible to everyone in this room, except perhaps Gutenberg himself, and even he seems plagued by doubt this morning. The printing press that will change everything started as an adaptation of wine press technology, the kind used throughout the Rhine Valley to crush grapes. Gutenberg spent years figuring out how to modify the screw mechanism to apply even pressure across a flat surface, how to create metal type that would produce consistent impressions, how to develop an ink that would transfer cleanly from metal to paper without smearing or fading. Each problem led to a dozen more. Each solution required experimentation and failure and starting over. The process nearly broke him financially and spiritually multiple times. You watch him select a piece of type from one of the many cases lining the walls, hold it up to the light, examine it for imperfections. These tiny pieces of metal represent years of metallurgical innovation. Gutenberg had to invent an entirely new alloy that would melt at relatively low temperatures, but remain hard enough to withstand repeated impressions. He experimented with combinations of lead, tin, and antimony, testing ratios, adjusting formulas, casting and recasting until he achieved exactly the right properties. The letter he's examining now is one of thousands, each hand-cut from a punch, each strike into a matrix requiring perfect precision, each cast requiring perfect consistency. The technology of movable type isn't entirely new to the world. Chinese inventors developed similar systems centuries earlier, using ceramic and wooden characters to print texts. Korean craftsmen created bronze type in the early 13th century. But none of these innovations spread beyond their regions of origin, and none triggered the kind of information revolution that's about to begin in this small German city. The difference isn't just the technology itself, but the convergence of multiple factors. The alphabetic writing system that requires only a few dozen characters instead of thousands, the growing demand for books among an increasingly literate merchant class, the development of paper manufacturing in Europe, and the peculiar genius of one obsessed inventor who understood how all these elements could fit together. Gutenberg moves to the form, the metal frame that holds the arranged type for a single page. This particular page contains text from the Bible, carefully composed letter by letter, word by word, line by line. The composition process took weeks of painstaking labor. Each character had to be selected from the type case, placed in a composing stick, spaced properly with blank pieces of lead, justified to create even margins, then transferred to the form. A single mistake could ruin hours of work. A misplaced letter could constitute heresy if it altered sacred text. The pressure on the compositors was immense, and you can see the evidence of their stress in the worried glances they exchange as Gutenberg inspects their work. The ink formulation represents another area where Gutenberg had to innovate beyond existing knowledge. Traditional inks used for manuscript writing wouldn't work with metal type and mechanical pressure. They were too thin, too inconsistent, unable to transfer properly from metal to paper. Gutenberg experimented with oil-based inks, testing different combinations of carbon black and various oils, adjusting viscosity, testing adhesion properties, measuring how long the ink would remain viable on the type before drying. The formula he finally developed produces deep, rich blacks that won't fade for centuries, though he doesn't know that yet. All he knows is that it works better than anything else he's tried. Outside the window, Mainz is beginning to wake up. You can hear the sounds of the city stirring, vendors setting up in the marketplace, church bells ringing the hour of prime, horses clopping on cobblestone streets, voices calling greetings in the distinctive dialect of the Rhine region. None of those people know that something extraordinary is about to happen in this unremarkable building on a side street. They're thinking about bread prices and weather and local gossip, not about how the fundamentals of human communication are about to transform. History often works this way, you've noticed. The most consequential moments unfold in obscurity while everyone's attention is directed elsewhere. Gutenberg's financial situation adds urgency to everything happening in this room. He owes money to Johann Fust, a wealthy merchant who invested 800 guilders in the printing project. That's an enormous sum, equivalent to several years of wages for a skilled craftsman. The loan came with interest and terms, and those terms are coming due. If this demonstration fails, if the merchants and clergy who arrive in less than an hour aren't impressed enough to place orders or provide additional funding, Gutenberg will lose everything. The press will be seized, the type melted down, years of innovation and effort reduced to settling a debt. The pressure of this possibility hangs in the air as heavy as the smell of ink. What you find fascinating is how much had to go right for this moment to occur. Gutenberg needed to be born in a city with both goldsmithing traditions and winemaking technology. He needed access to the new paper mills that had recently spread through Europe from their origins in the Islamic world. He needed the mathematical knowledge to solve problems of proportion and spacing. He needed the business connections to secure funding. He needed the religious environment that made Bible production both spiritually important and economically viable. He needed assistants skilled enough to execute his vision. Remove any one of these factors, and the printing revolution might have been delayed by decades or centuries. The apprentice Hans is now testing the press mechanism, pulling the bar that drives the screw downward, checking that the platen descends evenly across the forme. The wooden components creak and groan, sounds that make Gutenberg wince every time. He's worried about mechanical failure during the demonstration, worried that humidity might have swelled the wood overnight, worried about 100 different things that could go wrong. You can see him mentally rehearsing the presentation, planning what he'll say, how he'll explain the process, what arguments he'll use to convince skeptical observers that this strange machine represents humanity's future, rather than a craftsman's folly. The revolution about to begin isn't just technological, it's economic, social, religious, and political. Handwritten books currently cost a fortune, requiring months or years of labour by scribes who copy texts one letter at a time. A single Bible might cost as much as a farm, making book ownership possible only for the wealthy, the church, or universities. This artificial scarcity gives tremendous power to those who control access to written knowledge. The Catholic Church maintains its authority, partly through monopoly over biblical texts. Universities control which ideas spread and which remain obscure. The ability to mass-produce books will shatter these monopolies, distributing power in ways that nobody in this room can fully anticipate. Gutenberg himself probably isn't thinking about political revolutions or the Protestant Reformation or the scientific Enlightenment. He's thinking about whether he can sell enough Bibles to repay his loans and make a profit. He's an inventor and businessman, not a social revolutionary. Yet the technology he's created will enable Martin Luther to spread his 95 Theses throughout Germany in weeks rather than years. It will allow scientists to share discoveries and build upon each other's work. It will eventually make books cheap enough that common people can own them, literacy important enough that public education becomes necessary, ideas dangerous enough that governments try desperately to control printing presses. All of that stems from what's about to happen in this room. The morning light has strengthened now, illuminating the workspace more fully. You can see details you missed in the earlier dimness. The worn spots on the press where hands have gripped it thousands of times during testing, the stains on the floor where ink has spilled and been cleaned imperfectly, the exhaustion in the faces of the assistants who've probably been here all night preparing. There's a vulnerability to this scene, a sense of how fragile innovation really is. If Gutenberg had died of plague 5 years ago, someone else might have eventually invented movable type printing, but perhaps not for another generation. How many other inventions were lost because the right person died at the wrong time, or couldn't secure funding, or simply gave up when the problem seemed insurmountable? Hans announces that the press is ready for a test run. Gutenberg nods, and the assistants spring into action with practiced coordination. One applies ink to the type using leather balls stuffed with wool, dabbing carefully to ensure even coverage without excess that might cause smearing. Another positions a sheet of paper on the tympan, the hinged frame that will hold it in place during printing. A third checks the registration marks that ensure the paper aligns correctly with the type. These preparations have been refined through countless trial runs, each revealing some new problem to solve, some adjustment to make. The process looks smooth now, but it represents hundreds of hours of failure and learning. Gutenberg steps back, allowing his team to work without interference, though his hands clench and unclench at his sides. This is the hardest part for any creator, trusting others to execute your vision, accepting that you can't control every variable, knowing that success or failure might hinge on factors beyond your direct management. The apprentices understand the weight of this moment. They move with careful deliberation, double-checking each step, communicating in quiet murmurs that barely disturb the concentrated atmosphere. The bar is pulled, the screw descends, the platen presses the paper against the inked type with a pressure that has been calculated and calibrated through extensive experimentation. Too much pressure, and the paper tears or the type makes an impression so deep it damages future printings. Too little pressure and the ink doesn't transfer properly, leaving gaps and faint letters. Gutenberg spent months determining the exact amount of force needed, adjusting the mechanical advantage of the screw, modifying the size and weight of components. The press releases with a slight shudder, and the tympan is lifted to reveal the printed sheet. The result is perfect. Sharp black letters stand out against the white paper in neat, even lines. The spacing is consistent, the ink coverage uniform, the registration precise. It looks almost identical to the best manuscript pages produced by master scribes, but this took minutes instead of hours. One of the assistants exhales audibly, releasing tension he probably didn't realize he was holding. Hans grins widely before catching himself and adopting a more professional demeanor. Even Gutenberg allows himself a slight smile, the first you've seen from him this morning. But there's no time to celebrate. The demonstration begins in less than an hour, and there's still much to prepare. The test sheet is carefully set aside to dry. Fresh paper is positioned for the actual demonstration. Ink levels are checked and topped off. The type is examined one final time for any damage from the test impression. Tools are arranged within easy reach. The room is tidied, swept clean of paper scraps and metal shavings. Everything must look professional, organized, trustworthy. These visitors will be investing their money based partly on whether they believe Gutenberg and his team can deliver reliable results. You notice that Gutenberg keeps glancing toward the door, anticipating the arrival of the first guests. His fate depends on what happens in the next hour, but so does something much larger. If this demonstration succeeds, if orders are placed and production begins in earnest, the information revolution starts here, in this room, today. If it fails, the idea doesn't die. Someone somewhere will eventually develop similar technology. But it gets delayed, and all the consequences get postponed. The Protestant Reformation might not happen when it did. The scientific revolution might take a different form. The spread of literacy and the development of public education might follow different timelines. History has contingent moments, points where events could genuinely have gone another way, and you're witnessing one of them. The technology Gutenberg has created seems simple in retrospect, almost obvious. Take movable type, arrange it into words and lines, ink it, press paper against it, repeat as needed. But obvious solutions often appear that way only after someone demonstrates them. Before Gutenberg, scribes had been laboriously copying texts by hand for over 1,000 years. The Chinese had movable type for centuries, without it revolutionizing their society. Sometimes invention requires not just the technology, but the entire ecosystem around it. The social and economic conditions that allow an innovation to spread and transform, rather than remaining a curious novelty. The room falls silent, except for the steady tick of a mechanical clock, a relatively new invention itself, another technology changing how people experience time. Gutenberg stands near the press with his hands clasped behind his back, staring at it as though willing it to perform flawlessly. His assistants have completed their preparations, and now wait with nothing to do but manage their anxiety. This moment of stillness before the demonstration feels suspended, stretched, as though time itself is holding its breath before releasing something new into the world. You consider what it takes to change history. Vision, certainly, the ability to see possibilities others miss. Technical skill to transform vision into reality, persistence to work through failures and setbacks, resources to fund experimentation and development, luck to be born in the right place at the right time with the right circumstances. Gutenberg has all of these, though barely. His vision is clear even if its full implications aren't. His technical skills are extraordinary, combining goldsmithing precision with mechanical innovation. His persistence borders on obsessive, evident in the years he's devoted to this project, despite mounting debts and skepticism from others. His resources are stretched to the breaking point, dependent entirely on what happens in the next hour. His luck has held so far, but luck is fickle. The first knock on the door comes earlier than expected. Hans rushes to answer it, then returns, looking slightly panicked. "Master Gutenberg," he says in a low voice, "Johann Fust has arrived, and he's brought others with him." Gutenberg's face goes pale. Fust, his creditor, arriving early and unexpected, bringing witnesses. This could mean many things, none of them good. Perhaps Fust has lost patience and is here to seize assets. Perhaps he's brought competitors to steal the technology. Perhaps he simply wants to maximize the drama and pressure on this demonstration. Whatever his motivation, his presence changes the dynamic of what's about to happen. Gutenberg straightens his tunic, runs a hand through his thinning hair, and nods to Hans. "Show them in," he says, his voice steadier than you expected. This is it, then. The hour before history changes forever is about to become the hour when it actually changes. Everything that's coming, the spread of literacy, the democratization of knowledge, the wars of religion, the scientific revolution, the age of enlightenment, the modern world with all its possibilities and problems. All of it depends on what happens in this room in the next 60 minutes. The weight of that significance seems to press down on the space like the platen of the printing press itself. Invisible but palpable. The door opens and Johann Fust enters first, a prosperous merchant dressed in fine wool and expensive leather, his bearing confident and slightly aggressive. Behind him come half a dozen others, 2 clergymen in their distinctive robes, 3 merchants who eye the printing press with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, and a university scholar whose presence suggests Fust has been thorough in assembling a diverse audience. They spread out in the limited space, examining the equipment, the stacks of paper, the cases of type, their expressions revealing little about their thoughts. Gutenberg steps forward to greet them, and you can see him transform. The worried, anxious inventor disappears, replaced by a confident presenter who's clearly rehearsed this moment many times. "Gentlemen," he begins, his voice carrying well in the confined space, "thank you for coming. What you're about to witness will change the world of books forever." It's a bold claim, perhaps too bold, but he delivers it with such conviction that even the skeptical merchants lean forward slightly, interest piqued despite themselves. What follows is a demonstration of technical mastery that goes beyond mere mechanics. Gutenberg doesn't just show them a machine that prints, he tells them a story about what printing means, about the future it enables, about the opportunities it creates for everyone in this room. He speaks about monasteries where monks spend their entire lives copying a single Bible, about the cost of books putting knowledge beyond the reach of common people, about the errors that creep into hand-copied text as fatigue and inattention lead scribes astray. He speaks about a world where books might be affordable, where libraries could stock hundreds or thousands of volumes instead of dozens, where students could own textbooks instead of sharing a single copy among many. The clergymen exchange glances. The idea of cheap, widely available Bibles could be either wonderful or threatening depending on one's perspective. Easier access to scripture might strengthen faith, or it might encourage dangerous interpretations unmediated by church authority. You can see them wrestling with these implications as Gutenberg continues his presentation. The merchants are doing their own calculations, thinking about markets, profit margins, competition with scriptoriums, the capital required to establish printing shops. The scholar listens with the particular intensity of someone who lives and breathes the written word, someone who understands immediately how transformative this technology could be for education and scholarship. Then comes the practical demonstration. Gutenberg explains each step as his assistants perform it, selecting type from the cases, composing it into lines, locking the forme, applying ink, positioning paper, adjusting the press, pulling the bar, lifting the platen, revealing the finished sheet. The process takes perhaps 10 minutes from start to finish, and when the printed page emerges, crisp and clear and identical to a hand-scribed manuscript, a visible ripple of amazement passes through the observers. One of the merchants actually gasps. The scholar reaches out as if to touch the page, then draws his hand back, not wanting to smudge the fresh ink. "How many of these can you produce in a day?" asks Fust, his voice neutral, giving nothing away. This is the crucial question, the one that will determine whether printing is merely an interesting novelty or a genuine revolution. Gutenberg has prepared for this. A skilled team, he says, can print approximately 300 pages in a single day. Compare this to a scribe who might complete 2 or 3 pages in the same time if working on a complex text like the Bible. The numbers speak for themselves. One printing press with a team of 3 or 4 people can outproduce a scriptorium of 50 scribes. The economic implications are staggering, but one of the clergymen raises an objection you've been waiting to hear. "How can we be certain of accuracy?" he asks. With hand copying, each scribe reads and understands the text. With your machine, errors could be multiplied hundreds of times before anyone notices. It's a valid concern, and Gutenberg addresses it seriously. The composition process requires the same careful attention as scribing, he explains. But once the type is set and checked for accuracy, every impression will be identical. No copyist fatigue, no attention lapses, no degradation of quality as the day progresses, and any necessary corrections can be made to the type itself, affecting all subsequent impressions. The scholar speaks up for the first time. "May I examine the type more closely?" Gutenberg nods, and one of the assistants brings over a case of letters. The scholar studies them with evident fascination, noting the precision of the casting, the consistent height of the letters, the quality of the metal alloy. "Remarkable," he murmurs. "Truly remarkable. This represents years of metallurgical experimentation, does it not?" Gutenberg confirms that it does, and launches into a technical explanation of the alloy composition, the casting process, the importance of getting every detail exactly right. The scholar nods along, clearly appreciating the sophistication of what he's seeing. The merchants huddle together briefly, conferring in low voices. You can see them gesturing toward the press, toward the printed sheets, running through mental calculations. When they turn back to Gutenberg, the eldest among them asks about costs, the expense of setting up a printing operation, the price of paper and ink, the wages for skilled workers, the cost per book compared to manuscript production. Gutenberg has numbers ready for all of this. He's done his homework, prepared estimates and projections, thought through the business model from every angle. The books will still be expensive by common standards, but dramatically cheaper than manuscripts, and the profit margins for early adopters could be substantial. Fust has been silent throughout much of this, watching and listening with an unreadable expression. Finally, he speaks. "Show us the Bible," he says simply. Gutenberg nods to Hans, who carefully brings out several completed sheets from the Bible project, printed weeks earlier as test runs. The pages are works of art in themselves, double columns of Gothic type, carefully justified with space left for illuminated initials to be added by hand later. The text is the Vulgate, a Latin Bible familiar to every educated person in the room. The quality is immediately apparent, comparable to the finest manuscript Bibles produced by the best scriptoriums in Europe. One of the clergymen takes the pages with reverent care, reading portions aloud to check accuracy, examining the letter formation, the consistency of the ink, the spacing and layout. He compares it to a manuscript Bible he's brought with him, setting the pages side by side. The similarity is striking, except the printed version has a mechanical perfection that no human hand could quite achieve. Every letter of the same type is identical, the spacing mathematically consistent, the lines absolutely straight. "How long to print an entire Bible?" he asks. Gutenberg estimates that once the type is fully set, a process that will take several months, they could print a complete Bible in a matter of weeks, multiple copies running simultaneously. The implications begin to sink in visibly. You can see it in how the visitors look at each other, in the subtle changes in their postures and expressions. They came here curious or skeptical, or merely humoring a creditor's risky investment. They're leaving as witnesses to something genuinely unprecedented. The merchant who gasped earlier is now openly excited, talking rapidly to his companions about market opportunities, cities where printing shops might be established, the demand that surely exists for affordable books. The scholar is already imagining what this means for universities, for the preservation and dissemination of classical texts, for the advancement of learning. But it's the reaction of the clergymen that fascinates you most. They're caught between competing impulses. On one hand, the ability to produce inexpensive Bibles supports the Church's mission of spreading faith and scripture. On the other hand, that same ability threatens the Church's control over religious knowledge and interpretation. One of them asks Gutenberg directly, who will decide which texts are printed? Who will ensure that heretical or dangerous works are not spread widely? It's a question that will echo through the centuries, the fundamental tension between information freedom and information control that will define much of the printing age. Gutenberg's answer is diplomatic. I am a faithful son of the Church, he says. My purpose is to serve God by making his word more accessible. Naturally, the Church would have authority over what is appropriate to print. It's the answer they need to hear, though history will prove more complicated. Once the technology exists and spreads beyond Gutenberg's control, once multiple printing shops operate throughout Europe, the question of who decides what gets printed will become increasingly difficult to answer. The printing press will eventually escape all attempts at centralized control, becoming a tool of reformation and revolution, precisely because it's too useful and too profitable to suppress. Fust finally reveals his hand. Gentlemen, he addresses the group, I have invested considerably in this enterprise, and I believe you can see why. I propose that we form a consortium to fund full-scale production. Master Gutenberg has proven the concept. Now we must capitalize it properly. This is what he came for, then. Not to seize assets, but to expand the business, to bring in additional investors who can provide the substantial capital needed to ramp up production. The merchants immediately express interest. The scholar mentions university patrons who might want to be involved. Even the clergymen speak cautiously about church funds that might be directed toward such a worthy project. Negotiations begin immediately, right there in the printing shop, and you watch Gutenberg navigate them with surprising skill. He's protective of his invention, insisting on maintaining control over the technical processes, but flexible on business arrangements that will bring in needed funding. The conversation becomes detailed and specific. How many presses to construct, how many workers to hire, what texts to print first, how to price the books, where to sell them, how to protect the technology from competitors who will inevitably try to copy it once word spreads. The energy in the room has completely transformed from the nervous tension of the early morning to the electric excitement of people who sense they're on the cusp of something extraordinary. The hour before history changed forever is ending, and history is indeed changing. In this room, at this moment, the information age is being born. The technology Gutenberg has developed will spread rapidly now. Within 20 years, printing presses will operate in dozens of European cities. Within 50 years, millions of books will have been produced, fundamentally altering the intellectual landscape of Western civilization. The Protestant Reformation will become possible, because Martin Luther's ideas can spread faster than church authorities can suppress them. The scientific revolution will accelerate, because researchers can share findings and build upon each other's work. The Enlightenment will emerge because ideas can circulate widely enough to create genuine public discourse. But all of that still lies in the future. Right now, in this moment, there are just 11 people in a printing shop in Mainz making plans and agreements, excited about business opportunities and technical possibilities, not fully grasping that they're participants in one of the genuine turning points of human history. You watch them huddle around tables covered with documents, sketching out partnership terms, calculating investments and projected returns, their voices overlapping in enthusiasm and disagreement and negotiation. Outside the window, Mainz continues its ordinary day, unaware that everything is about to change. Gutenberg catches your eye for just a moment, and in his expression, you see something unexpected, relief mixed with something like sorrow. He's about to succeed beyond his wildest financial dreams, but success means losing exclusive control of his invention, sharing credit and profits with partners, watching his creation spread beyond his ability to guide it. Every innovator faces this moment eventually, the point where their creation takes on a life of its own, where it belongs to the world rather than to them. For Gutenberg, that moment is now. The negotiations continue through midday and into the afternoon, breaking only briefly for a simple meal brought in from a nearby tavern. The papers being drafted will formalize the partnership, establish the financial structures, outline the production plans. Gutenberg's assistants listen from the edges of the room, understanding that their own futures are being determined by these agreements. Hans looks particularly anxious, worrying perhaps whether he'll have a place in the expanded operation or whether new, more experienced workers will replace him. The technology of printing is simple enough that skilled craftsmen can learn it, which means the initial team who helped develop it have no guarantee of continued employment. One detail that emerges during the negotiations fascinates you. The partners decide that their first major project after the Bible will be a printed edition of Letters of Indulgence, the controversial church documents that promise reduction of time in purgatory in exchange for donations to church projects. These letters are currently handwritten by clerks, a labour-intensive process that limits how many can be issued. Printing them will make them vastly more available, generating substantial revenue for both the church and the printing partnership. Ironically, the mass production of indulgences will help fund the printing industry, and the printing industry will later enable Luther's critique of indulgences to spread throughout Europe, contributing to the Protestant Reformation. History works in paradoxes sometimes, using tools created for one purpose to accomplish something entirely different. By late afternoon, the basic terms have been agreed upon. Fust will increase his investment. The merchants will contribute capital in exchange for ownership shares. The church will provide both money and exclusive contracts for certain types of religious texts. The scholar will help recruit university customers and may even arrange for the printing of classical texts for educational use. Gutenberg will maintain technical control and receive a percentage of profits in addition to a salary that will finally provide him with financial security after years of poverty and debt. Everyone leaves satisfied that they've struck a good deal, though the real winners are impossible to determine yet. Some of these investors will make fortunes. Others will be ruined by competition and market changes they can't predict. As the visitors depart, shaking hands and making promises to return with contracts and additional capital, the printing shop feels simultaneously empty and full. Empty of the energy and excitement that filled it during the demonstration and negotiations, but full of potential, heavy with the weight of what's been set in motion. Gutenberg stands by the press, one hand resting on its frame, looking exhausted but unburdened. His assistants begin cleaning up, organizing papers, checking equipment, returning to the familiar routines that will now serve a vastly expanded purpose. You reflect on what you've witnessed. The hour before history changed forever turned out to be less dramatic than myth might suggest, more about business negotiations than world-changing revelations. Yet, that's often how genuine historical change works. Not with grand speeches and obvious turning points, but with practical people solving practical problems, making deals, trying to turn innovations into sustainable enterprises. The printing press succeeds not just because it's technically impressive, but because it makes economic sense, because it serves existing needs while creating new possibilities, because it fits into networks of capital and labour and expertise that can support its spread. The immediate future is predictable enough. Presses will be built, workers trained, books printed and sold. Within months, Gutenberg's operation will expand beyond this single building. Within a year or two, other craftsmen will figure out the basic principles and establish competing shops. Within a decade, the technology will have spread to Italy, France, the Netherlands, Spain. The exact details will vary. Different designs, different business models, different market focuses. But the fundamental transformation will be universal wherever printing takes root. The era of manuscript culture, which has defined literate civilization for millennia, will end with surprising speed. The longer-term consequences are harder to predict, though you have the advantage of knowing how things actually unfold. The printing press will eventually contribute to the rise of vernacular languages as serious literary mediums, because printing makes it economically viable to produce books in languages other than Latin. It will accelerate the standardization of spelling and grammar, because printers need consistency and readers grow accustomed to it. It will help create national literatures and national identities. It will enable the development of newspapers and periodicals, changing how people receive information about current events. It will make education more accessible and uniform, supporting the emergence of public schooling. It will even influence the development of silent reading, as the abundance of books makes it common for people to read alone, rather than always in groups where one person reads aloud to others. But perhaps the most profound change will be more subtle and pervasive. The transformation of human consciousness that comes from living in a print-saturated world. People who grow up with abundant access to books think differently than people in primarily oral cultures. They develop different cognitive skills, different ways of organizing knowledge, different relationships to authority and tradition. Print enables complex arguments that can be revisited and analyzed rather than memorized and recited. It creates private intellectual space where individuals can engage with ideas without social mediation. It makes possible the very concept of the autonomous individual thinker that will become central to Enlightenment philosophy. None of this happens immediately or directly, but all of it stems ultimately from the technology being finalized in this room this afternoon. Gutenberg dismisses his assistants for the evening, telling them to rest because tomorrow they begin ramping up production in earnest. Hans hesitates at the door, clearly wanting to say something, but unable to find the words. Gutenberg notices and smiles tiredly. "You did well today, Hans," he says. "You'll have a permanent place here as long as you want it." The young apprentice's face brightens immediately, and he leaves walking taller than before. Small kindnesses and moments of triumph reveal character, and Gutenberg has shown himself to be Not just an inventor and businessman, but a decent human being who remembers those who helped him when success was uncertain. Alone now, except for you, Gutenberg returns to the press one final time. He runs his hands over it almost affectionately, this machine that consumed years of his life and nearly destroyed him financially, this culmination of all his skills and knowledge and stubbornness. I wonder, he says quietly, perhaps to himself or perhaps to you, what the world will look like 100 years from now, when books are commonplace and every city has printing shops. It's a reasonable question, though even his imagination probably cannot conceive of just how different that world will be. He cannot imagine newspapers and novels and scientific journals and dictionaries and encyclopedias and technical manuals and mass-market paperbacks and all the other forms that printed text will eventually take. The setting sun streams through the window now, painting everything in warm gold and deep shadow. The day that began with anxiety and uncertainty ends with accomplished fact and confident plans for the future. The hour before history changed forever has passed into the hour when it actually changed, and then into the hours when the change begins to propagate outward, rippling through society in waves that will take generations to fully manifest. You feel a sense of completion, of having witnessed something genuinely important, not because of dramatic events, but because of the quiet determination of one man and the practical support of others who saw the value in his vision. This moment will be remembered and celebrated and mythologized. Paintings will depict Gutenberg at his press, usually showing it more elegant and refined than the actual utilitarian machine standing before you. Statues will be erected in his honor. The printing press will become a symbol of human ingenuity and the power of technology to transform civilization. Scholars will write countless dissertations about the impact of print culture. All of that future commemoration feels almost absurd here in the dusty workshop, with its smell of ink and oil and worn floorboards creaking underfoot. Heroes of history are just people. You're reminded once again, people with financial pressures and technical problems and normal human concerns, who happen to be in the right place at the right time with the right combination of skills and persistence to change everything. Gutenberg extinguishes the lamps as darkness fully claims the city outside. The press becomes a dark silhouette against the fading light from the window. Tomorrow it will roar back to life, beginning the work of mass-producing knowledge. But tonight it rests, its revolutionary purpose accomplished simply by existing, by being possible, by proving that human communication need not be limited by the speed of scribal hands. You prepare to leave, to step out of this moment and back into your own time, carrying with you the memory of the hour before history changed forever. An hour that turned out to be filled not with thunder and lightning, but with technical demonstrations and business negotiations and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Just before you go, Gutenberg speaks one more time into the darkness. They'll remember the press, he says, but they should remember this. The hardest part wasn't the invention. The hardest part was believing it could work, and continuing to believe it through all the failures and setbacks and people saying it was impossible. The press is just metal and wood. The real invention was the refusal to accept that things had to stay as they'd always been. It's the most profound thing he's said all day, and maybe the most important. Every innovation requires not just technical skill, but the imagination to envision alternatives and the stubbornness to pursue them, despite all reasonable objections. The printing press exists because Gutenberg possessed both in abundance. The hour before history changed forever is over now. History has changed, though most people won't realize it for years or decades. The technology released into the world today will spread and evolve and enable transformations that nobody in 1455 minds can fully anticipate. It will empower and threaten, liberate and control, enlighten and propagandize. It will be used for great good and terrible harm, sometimes simultaneously, but it will above all make the modern world possible, creating the information infrastructure on which science, education, democracy, literature, journalism, and countless other aspects of contemporary life depend. All of that stems from this moment, this place, this machine, this man who refused to accept limitations on human communication. As you step out into the medieval night, leaving Gutenberg alone with his press and his thoughts, you carry with you profound respect for how much one dedicated person can accomplish, and how completely the world can change in a single hour when preparation meets opportunity and innovation meets implementation.